Okay, we're almost there. It's the home stretch. We have one more session. An excellent, exciting one. This is the part of the world that I focus on, so I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. We're talking about harnessing the Africa opportunity, and it falls on me to just hand you over to the moderator for the session, Muroki. My apologies. My apologies. Please, over to you, Mercy.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to, can everybody hear me fine?
I think that's it.
Yeah? Everybody hear me? Should I? Everybody hear me? Is that fine?
We have a backup here in case it's sorted out.
Yeah. Does anybody want to try speaking?
Hello?
Oh, you can hear you.
Hello?
Hello.
I guess it's just me. Okay, thank you. I think I can be heard now. Well, I'm very pleased to kick off one of the final discussions of the day, harnessing the African opportunity. My name's Mercy Muroki, and my day job is advisor to Minister for Women and Equalities, who's also the Business and Trade Secretary. So this session is called Harnessing the African Opportunity, and as we all know, it's a hugely important region with abundant opportunities. The strength of the Investment Council's network across sub-Saharan Africa is very much testament to that. So just to put into context the extraordinary growth of Africa over recent history, Africa as a share of the global population has doubled since the beginning of the 20th century, and in fact, the UN projects that by 2050, Africa's population will reach close to 2.5 billion. And this will mean that 1 in 4 of the world's population will be African, and that's a figure that's estimated to reach 40% by the end of the 20th century. But of course, it's not just in population where we see the growth as well. 6 of the world's largest, not largest, but 6 of the world's fastest growing economies are in the African continent. And with governance being strengthened over the past few decades, which has boosted stability and prosperity, the opportunities within the region are unprecedented. So one such opportunity comes in the form of the world's largest free trade zone, the African Continental Free Trade Area, of course, which is connecting 1.3 billion people across 55 countries. Now, the free trade area is estimated by the World Bank to boost Africa's income by $450 billion by 2035 and increase Africa's exports by $560 billion, which will be mostly in manufacturing. And when Africa wins, the rest of the world wins, because the World Bank estimates that the trading agreement will add $76 billion to the income of the rest of the world. In a moment, I'll introduce my panel for this discussion on harnessing the African opportunity. But before I do that, we're very pleased to be joined by Peter Obi. He's going to open the session for us. Mr. Obi is a long-time entrepreneur, business leader, and politician. He's been the founding director and a board member of numerous highly successful businesses across the financial sector, as well as serving in executive positions at a number of banks. He's heavily involved in local and national politics in Nigeria and served as the governor of Anambra State, I hope I got that pronunciation correct, from 2007 to 2014. And he's received numerous awards as well in recognition of his services to the development of the Nigerian economy and its constituents. So please welcome Mr. Obi with me.
Thank you, Mercy. I think mine is just to introduce the panelists, continue the introduction of the panelists, because they are the ones who will tell us how we can harness this opportunity. So for me, it's just an introduction. But I think, like Mercy said, it's a very interesting topic because of where Africa is standing today. So I will leave the major work to the panelists and know what they can do. Harnessing the African opportunity. For me, this is a topic of immense importance and promise. The opportunities within the African continent is very vast in terms of, you can call it, say, there's incredible, Africa has an incredible richness of resources, from natural resources to human capital. As the second largest in terms of size and most populous continent in the world, a population of 1.4 billion, with a very useful concentration. I think we have the highest useful concentration of about 1.1 billion. No other continent can boast of such population as a dynamic workforce. That is it. There's other advantages you can talk about in Africa. You talk about the mineral resources. So, of course, Africa has over 874 hectares of arable land and everything that you can look at. But I just go through this country. The economy, he mentioned that the 12 countries, if you look at projections of next year, of the 20 countries that are when you talk about that are going to be on top of growth, 12 are in Africa. That shows how incredible this continent is to the world today, and this will continue. But I just use 4 areas to show what is happening in Africa, to tell you the future, why this continent is very important for people to get involved. You talk an area of technology, area of entertainment, natural resources, and agriculture. In technology, Africa is not only catching up with the technological advancements of developed economies, but it is also innovating in a unique way. From the fintech, the financial technology solutions that addresses financial inclusion today, to other areas, Africa is growing very fast. Today, Africa is number one market, you would say, growing market for mobile phone, internet access, and this is rapidly changing the way people live in Africa and the way they control it. And there's so much opportunities for businesses, including what is happening towards education, health. As an enabler of business, this area is growing very fast. Entertainment. The rise of African entertainment industries such as Nigerian Nollywood, Sollywood of South Africa, Riverwood of Kenya, Gallywood of Ghana, and many others, with an estimated revenue of over 5 billion and can grow to as much as 20 billion, is again being driven by global attention from investors, multinational corporations, and digital platforms. The increase has led to increasable inflow of startup capital, strategic investment in area of content, and rising global viewership. Beyond the physical implication, African music and entertainment have assumed roles as conduits for preservation of cultural identity and heritage, serving as a medium of storytelling that you're seeing today. And this, again, is an area that is growing rapidly in Africa. Natural resources is an area where everybody knows today that Africa is home to a litany of natural resources, including oil, gas, mineral, and timber. For instance, 40% of the world gold and 90% of the chromium and platinum deposits are in Africa. The largest deposits of world cobalt are in Africa. The richest country today in terms of mineral and natural resources, everybody knows, is Democratic Republic of Congo, with over 20 trillion in natural resources. And this includes deposits of coltan, cobalt. The RDC picture can be extrapolated to many other African countries. This is in addition to well-known gas and oil reserves of Nigeria, Angola, Gabon, and of course, gold of Botswana. Agriculture. Recent studies have shown that 60% of the uncultivated land in the world is in Africa. 60%. If Africa gets agriculture right, today the food value or the agricultural value in Africa is about 300 billion. That could go by 2030 to over 1 trillion. For if we get agriculture right in Africa, Africa will become a powerhouse for the world agricultural production and will become a net exporter. I've always said, self as Nigeria, that Nigeria can earn more from oil than it's earning from agriculture. So, from agriculture that is earning from oil. Because of the vast uncultivated land in the north. You can use it to pull. With all this, I just want to use this for example because I said they will be able to do more from that. You could see that this is a continent of an incredible resources that is untapped, unharnessed, and have the youthful, like I said at the beginning, population that can drive this process. But with all this, there's a considerable problems that needs to be dealt with, starting with the issue of leadership failure, issue of policy inconsistency, and everything that needs to be worked on and ensure that the right things are done, the right policies, the right implementation, and everything. For the Commonwealth, where did they come in? Like I said, they will follow it up, but there's a partnership. African population of 1.4 billion is about 50% of the Commonwealth population. So, for the Commonwealth, working with Africa is critical because African success can be Commonwealth success. And as I said, the failure can arguably be the same thing. By investing in Africa, today you can see that the world is all going to Africa. All you see today is American-African Summit, UK-African Summit, Russian-African Summit. Everybody is doing summit. Do I argue that they are doing it wrongly because they always put UK before Africa? They should actually reverse it. It's Africa that they are going to. So it should be Africa-UK Summit because there's nothing else left in the developed world to offer. We have something to offer, and that's what they're looking for. Then there's someone else to come, but they need to come looking for us because we have everything. I just said it now. There's no continent of the world that has the mineral resources that is in Africa. There's no part of the world that have uncultivated land like us. There's no part of the world that has youthful workforce like us. So Africa is the future. And I urge the Commonwealth and everything to embrace this future. We need support, funding in areas of human capital development, access to funds, and other areas. But like I said, the panelists, mine is to introduce the topic and leave the panelists, but I'm introducing to you a continent of immense potential that needs everybody to be in. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. A continent of immense potential, I think. Those are really good final words from you there. Thank you. I'm now going to introduce the esteemed panel here. On your far right is Tokunboh Ishmael, who's co-founder and managing director of Alitheia Capital, which is a female-led impact investing private equity firm. She's a global voice for unlocking the potential that businesses that provide essential goods and services in underserved markets. She's also a Yale World Fellow and a member of the inaugural cohort of the Aspen Institute Finance Leadership Fellowship. In the middle over there is Aisha Rimi. She is Executive Secretary and CEO of Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. She started her legal career at, and you might have to help me out on this pronunciation, Ajumogbia and Okike.
Very good, well done.
I'm East African, I'm not West African, so my pronunciation isn't great. This was followed by a role as visiting attorney at Shadbourne and Park. And in 2002, she assumed the role of Senior Vice President at GWI Consulting, and then founded Rimi and Partners in 2007. She is the managing partner, was the managing partner of Rimi and Partners. She played a pivotal role in the firm's corporate and commercial law department until her most recent appointment at the Nigeria Investment Promotion Commission. And James Johnstone, next to me, is the portfolio manager for the frontier market strategy at Redwheel, and he has over 20 years of experience in investment management and research. He was senior managing director and director of investments at Everest Capital, responsible for portfolio management and research in frontier markets. He also served in the Royal Navy for 5 years and holds a master's in classics and modern languages from Oxford University. Thank you for your time today, panel. Tokunboh, I'd love to start with you, and please feel free to respond to anything Peter said as well. Your work focuses on private equity as a tool for unlocking overlooked opportunities in key areas of goods and services. I just wondered what you think how can international organizations invest in Africa and work with African governments and businesses to unlock the massive potential that Peter has just been talking about there and have a positive social impact as well?
Thank you, and good afternoon, early evening, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to this session today. Indeed, Mr. Obi's remarks did lay a good foundation for us. In fact, I would almost say he said the whole thing. So, but we'll try and find some gems to add to what he has said. The first thing is that international organizations are already investing across Africa to drive for both financial returns and social and developmental impact. In fact, the development finance institutions have been doing this for decades across the country, across the continent. My firm, about 16 years ago, when we started, we wanted to shift the narrative away from private equity being about merely financial returns and really connecting what we hear in terms of allocation of capital for large infrastructure, governments making pledges, to the businesses and people on the ground that were not getting access to finance to run their businesses or even have job creation and livelihoods. So the first thing to say, it is happening. However, there are hurdles. First of all, again, it's usually foreign capital that's coming in to say we want to drive on the impact investing, which is including social and development along finance. We need more domestic capital happening, convening towards that. For example, in Nigeria, there's probably one of many pension funds that are investing in this particular asset class, whereas you find all European governments have development finance funds that are flowing in. The other thing to say is that alongside pension funds are asset allocators, insurance, etc. We need to see more of that intentionality going towards finance for both financial returns and the developmental aspect. And then also the environment, the business environment, right? So for a lot of the businesses that we invest in, they're small and growing businesses, and energy, for example, is the largest aspect of their cost structure. And so the infrastructure that makes it possible for them to do business, before they've even been able to make any kind of return, has been eaten up by energy. So how do we have the good business environment, the good energy, and now we're talking about use of our renewable resources, which are abundant on the African continent, whether it's from solar or from the coastals for the water, and with some of the green hydrogen projects that are happening. How do we leverage on climate finance to drive down costs, again, contributing to a good business environment? And one last thing I'll say, there are many, but in terms of key about the business environment, again, we talk about in Africa, we want, or in most African countries, we want to drive for exports. We, like Mr. Obi said, we have an expanse of arable land. We're not even using it. Agriculture is the largest employer across the continent. We can't, if we indeed used up all our potential within agriculture, we can't even, what we produce is we can't consume all of it. And so we need manufacturing to process, and we need ease of exporting. You would think that given our markets, we want to drive for that export. But again, that's an issue. We have ports, infrastructure constraints. I mean, I can go on, but really the key things for me are how's domestic capital coming to be intentional to invest for our shared prosperity and whole well-being? How is the public, how is government working towards creating a good business environment, taking care of these cost inefficiencies, infrastructure challenges, etc.? I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. That was really informative. Aisha, I know you're obviously very familiar with the Nigerian market as well. Do you recognise what she said there? Is that your impression of things? And also, of course, when it comes to creating a business environment, there's inequalities and disparities even within the country as well, across the different regions. So how can we ensure that when the benefits and opportunities are flowing, it is actually different regions are accessing them equally, rather than just being concentrated into the already wealthy areas?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me here today. So I think, yes, I do recognize a lot of what Tokes has said, but just to contextualize where I'm coming from. So the NIPC, which is the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, was set up essentially to do exactly what Tokes has talked about, which is to help government. So create this enabling environment that makes it easy or easier, certainly for businesses and investors coming into Nigeria. So if there's anything the British left us with, it's a civil service that can be quite bureaucratic. And so this was set up as an organization that works alongside government, but as the more nimble arm of government that acts as this bridge between investors and government. So what are the functions? It's to facilitate, promote, encourage, support, provide all the services that an investor would need, and even tackling policy challenges and working with government to address some of those issues. Nigeria, which, yes, you've rightly pointed out, is vast, and there are disparities as we move across. I mean, His Excellency, Mr. Obi, talked about the vast, untapped agricultural arable land up in the north. One of the things that we've done is we've set up regional offices to work. So Nigeria is split into 6 geopolitical zones, and so we've got offices in each of these zones to work with investors and the local communities there to provide opportunities for them to be heard. There's regional offices, like I said. We work with the state governments. Some obviously are more ready than others, and where those exist, we we work with them, and they're quick and easy to support. For the ones that are just coming up, and I think there's probably about 22 separate sort of state investment agencies, we work with them, training programs, capacity building, building up companies or opportunities that may exist. And we have also at the NIPC what is called a one-stop investment center, which again houses all of the different government agencies, so investors don't have to keep going around to all the different offices. They can walk in there and have as many of their problems that we can solve as much as possible. So I think we're also working in the new year. We're going to work with UNDP in terms of building up some of these regional state investment agencies, and we have what is called also a book of states. Please, somebody just remind. I think it's a book of states, right? Sorry, I'm quite new in the job. We have a book of states, again, which we encourage the states to supply their information, and that's updated on a fairly regular basis. It's fluid, it's a constant work in progress, but that's how we sort of spread our tentacles.
Thank you for that. And James, talking of works in progress, your specialty is frontier markets, some of the riskier markets. And from your experience of dealing with the more riskier markets, where do you think, when it comes to investment in Africa, where are the most overlooked opportunities, and what can be done to make some of these markets a more attractive investment destination for investors?
Thank you. So we run about $10 million in emerging markets, of which nearly 10% is in Africa. So we've got $1 billion in Africa. We don't often slice and dice it this way, but I suppose we've got $1 billion in South Asia, Commonwealth as well. So we're big investors across Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and obviously India. I would slightly object to calling it risky. We've delivered very good returns to our investors in frontier markets over the last 10 years. There's a perception of risk, which is very much at odds with the reality on the situation. I've had the great pleasure of being invested in Zenith for 10 years with Mr. Ovia. I now obviously deal with Ebenezer and Mukhtar a lot. Got great CEOs like Roger. Aliko Dangote's built a most incredible business. And so people often say to me, I was in Australia last week promoting the investments in emerging markets and talking about Africa. And I say that the quality of management teams across Africa is equal, if not better, than many of the management teams that you'll meet almost anywhere else in the world. And so the perception of risk is completely at odds with the price that you're currently paying. Now, if I take you on a quick history lesson, and I know we've got some Hong Kong experts in the room, but if I'd been in Hong Kong in 2000 and told you that you'd all be sitting here in 20 years' time with Chinese-made phones working for a company worth $3 trillion, you would have literally laughed at me. I happen to now be sitting on the stage with a Korean phone made in Vietnam. I have no doubt that in 20 years' time, hopefully if I've still got a job, I could well be sitting here with a Nigerian phone made in Nigeria. The world is short two things: young people and commodities. And we've had some fantastic presentations through the course of the morning explaining to us why Africa is the solution. I think Sanjeev Gupta kind of got there, and I have to add the last kind of rather tawdry bit is, and how much money you're going to make out of Africa. You're going to make a fortune out of Africa. I mean, no one told you that China was going to be an economy smaller than Holland in the early 2000s, now being the second largest economy in the world. If I just take you very briefly through the numbers, emerging markets in 2000 was a population of 2.6 billion. It's now 3.8. It was a GDP of 5 trillion. It's now 30 trillion. And market cap, which is ultimately the dirty bit we all care about, how much money we make, market cap's gone from 1.2 trillion to 24 trillion. Now, Africa today, 1.3 billion, probably going to 2 billion. GDP today is $3 trillion. Now, again, I was in Australia. Quite incredibly, Australia is, whatever it is, the 100th largest population in the world and has the 4th largest pension fund asset base in the world, $3.5 trillion of savings. Africa today is a $3.1 trillion GDP. We think that could go to at least 10 trillion over 20 years' time. We think that the megacities and urbanization, which is the key aspect of what we've seen in India and China, megacities go from 4 to over 40. Africans of working age go from 500 million to 1.1 billion. So we solve the young people problem the world faces. And how does this translate? Market cap today of Africa is about $200 billion. That's 5 days of trading volume of Apple. $200 billion for 2 billion people. Africa's been very underrepresented in global markets for the last 10 years. We've had difficult times of economic stress. We've had issues in FX across Africa and parts of South Asia. But we're very convinced today that I can buy an amazing bank like Zenith, and maybe I shouldn't say Zenith, I can buy an amazing bank in Nigeria today, amazingly for $7 per capita. Now, coming back to some of the points made about commodities added value, I could do exactly the same in Indonesia in 2000. Indonesian stock markets lost 97% in dollar terms in 1997. If you'd gone to Bali on holiday and just happened to get money out of Bank Central Asia's ATM and said, I quite like this company, I quite like this country, the bank works, and you bought $1 of stock in BCA in 2001, today it's worth $70. So amazingly enough, the maths bizarrely work, you paid $7 a person to buy a bank in Indonesia in 2000, you now pay $260. Today you can buy the largest banks in Nigeria for $7 per capita. We see huge upside. The problem is the world doesn't recognize it. So there's a huge opportunity, we think, and there's a lot of focus on debt, there's a lot of focus on trade, there's a lot of focus on aid. The one big piece of the puzzle we think people are forgetting is the equity capital markets, both private and public. And what I think should happen is that the domestic pensioners of the future, the 1.4 billion people who are going to grow for the next 50 years, they should be the owners of these markets. And they should be getting the big benefits of watching these banks go from $1 billion to $70 billion.
Thank you. Lots of statistics there. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Tokunboh, do you think there is still a perception gap almost, and do you think it is changing in terms of how attractive Africa is as an investment destination? And also, if you could, I know obviously you talk a lot about ESG. You've written an article recently, it's on LinkedIn, for those who are interested about this Gender 3.0 concept, and I was wondering if you could also explain what the importance of that is in investment.
Yeah, so first of all, yes, there is a perception gap, but it's not just a foreign perception gap, it's also a domestic perception gap, because just like I said earlier and like Chris said, the local pension funds, the local asset allocators are not investing in equity of businesses across board. They're only investing in the public markets, and that's limited. And so the benefit of that growth is still going to be eluding the citizens of the continent, but it's also going to result in continued underinvestment. So the foreign capital has to be matched by domestic, because actually the foreign capital that's flowing in, companies like Chris's, are recognizing the opportunity. So there is that perception gap. With respect to investing and the reasons why it is important that we think about not just the finance but the development capital side of things, is that, first of all, when we talk about this youth dividend that we have across the continent, if there isn't intentionality around investment in educating these youth and ensuring that jobs are being created, which is linked to ensuring that we have the good business environment so that manufacturing can happen, I have no doubt that we could manufacture a phone in Nigeria, anywhere, and there are phones that are being manufactured, but are they happening at scale? Are they happening with efficiency? No. We don't have the right policy and business environment that enables companies to scale properly, because they're being hindered by these cost inefficiencies. My counterparts in the West, I'm a fund manager based out of Nigeria, investing across Africa. They don't have to have a mini local government like I do to run my business. So they can just focus on the business opportunities. So getting rid of those hurdles is going to be very important. Now, coming to the other aspect of developmental and the article that you alluded to, Gender 3.0. So we were pioneers in impact investing, started impact investing in Africa over 16 years ago before there was a term, which led us to opportunities in fintech because we were driving for financial inclusion, and for that to happen, we knew that technology had to play a role. And so we drew for inclusive investments, which then, as we all know now, have provided innovation that benefits the whole. Going from that, we then started looking at other inclusive strategies, which includes, for us, gender inclusion, because we realized that across the continent, over 50% of businesses are owned by women, but only about 2% of those get funding. And I don't know any continent in the world that's going to succeed if it's only playing with half of its team. And so we were intentional about looking for female founders that are scaling large businesses, because if you the research is there, gender diverse businesses provide superior performance. Over 20% is the number that the alpha above businesses that are not diverse. But also for Africa, there's a McKinsey report that says over $12 billion can be added to Africa's GDP if we are intentional about being inclusive about gender as a factor for businesses to thrive and grow. Going from that, what I call Gender 1.0, to now Gender 3.0 is how can we ensure that that intentionality spreads to intentionality for cost efficiency through climate financing and digital transformation, which we believe will amplify the returns on the intentionality around that initial gender diversity strategy.
Thank you. And I want to bring you in, Aisha, because of course, it's been alluded to and mentioned quite explicitly that Nigeria has a massively, rapidly growing population, and actually, as I began with sort of giving those figures for the exponential growth of the population. How can we harness that? Because, as Tokunboh said, it needs to be the right environment for businesses. You need to actually unlock the potential of people, including women, to be able to properly maximize on those returns. How do we do that with such a rapidly growing population and all the risks that poses?
Thank you. So what Tokunboh didn't say, which is being very kind, was in terms of harnessing the potential of the youth and women and diversity, was the issue of policy flip-flopping. Yes, she was being very kind. And we acknowledge that, we know that. And just to touch on what you said about risk as well, I wouldn't necessarily see it as a risk, I would see it more as an advantage. Because where you have this incredibly vibrant, young, growing, and dynamic population, I think 60% of, I believe, I'm not that good with statistics, but I think about 60% is under the age of 35, somewhere between, there's abundant opportunities. I mean, we've talked about agriculture, even though it's becoming largely mechanized, but we do know that that will take a while for that to filter down. So there are opportunities there. There's opportunities in education, not just investing, but because these young people need to be educated. So investment opportunities exist where, for education in the health sector, of course, because again, with that kind of growth comes all. Is this off? Oh, okay. Sorry. There will be challenges. Then, of course, there's infrastructure development. We now have, we know we have infrastructure deficits, but of course, there's the opportunities that lie in sort of not just roads and rails and whatever, but also in terms of housing, because there will be housing deficits. So, I mean, this is, we've talked about fintech as well. We've seen the growth in digital technology. And one of the things, that, and again, I disagree with you about 20 years. I think give us another couple of years. I think you'll see quite a bit from our youth. So The opportunities are vast. Yes, there are risks, but where there are risks, there are also rewards, potential rewards.
Yeah, I think that's something we'd all agree on. And I do want to put you on the spot as the only man on the panel. And I was going to say you're the only Westerner, but we found out you were born in Nairobi. So I think he sort of counts as African. When it comes to some of the more social goals of investment, whether it is to do with education, climate, empowering women, it's always been seen as a kind of, female empowerment has been seen as the domain of women, something women should talk about, and men have kind of just nodded along, sort of. And we know that finance and investment is very still heavily male, despite the statistics Tokunboh says about business ownership in Africa, but it's still a very heavily male industry. Do you think genuinely that the men are getting on board now in terms of some of these social goals, especially when it comes to gender equality?
We've got a very diverse team. We're based across Miami, Singapore, and London, so I am probably still all those characteristics are the only one in the team as well. But I think it's incredibly important. Countries evolve and move along the GDP per capita chain if everything works. Now, I don't often get to use my Russian degree anymore, but the opening line of Anna Karenina is all happy families are happy in the same way, and all unhappy families are unhappy in their own fashion. Now, countries get it right because they're bringing the population together. There's only one true path to long-term economic success, and that's long-term manufacturing successes. You have to drive the population, in effect, into an urbanized light manufacturing consumption mold. And that only achieves, as someone said earlier, if you bring everyone in. You can't just have one. And ironically, actually, the female part of the population spend their money much more wisely. There are some great studies I could bore you with, but if you look at the wealth creation in parts of Southeast Asia versus Bangladesh, I'll take for an example, because we talked about earlier what percentage of clothing that we buy in the UK is now made in Bangladesh. Women occupy a much stronger part of the working environment. There's 6 million garment workers in Bangladesh, the vast majority of which are women, and they spend their money much more wisely. They want to educate their children. They want to buy better food for their children. They want better healthcare for their children. They don't want to go down the pub. So beer consumption, ironically, you can really actually match beer consumption, cigarette consumption in countries where so for us, it's incredibly important to understand where women are coming through in the workforce and where they're not. And we can see very sharp differences in that acceleration. Everyone wants to earn more money. I'll never forget someone in Nairobi said to me, all I want is an iPhone, a Spotify account, and a Netflix account. People want them to spend their money as they get richer, and the only way to really achieve that commodity wealth is a hard way for long-term prosperity. But your point, some of the best CEOs that we invest in are women. The Bank of Kigali in Rwanda has a fantastic C-suite, which is exclusively women. And they do the most incredible job. We were fortunate enough to have President Kagame came to present to us at one of our conferences. And again, Rwanda is one of these incredible countries where it's got a much higher majority of women in parliament than men. Iceland, ironically, is counted as frontier. Again, they got rid of all the men in 2008 for doing such a bad job. And it's almost exclusively now run by women. So for us, SDGs, the UN Sustainable Development Goals are incredibly important. But really, it's about the simple things. As you get richer, you want to feed your children better food, you want to give them better nutrition, you want to clothe them better, you want them to brush their teeth every day. Really simple things. And so for us, the presence of women in society and in the industry is incredibly important for us to understand the movements that will happen in consumer spending. So hopefully that gives me a little bit of a get out.
Can I tag on to that? Just one thing, because you mentioned SDGs, and I think it's great, SDGs, because that's become a badge, but it's also become a badge to say, that CSR work or that charity work. I think people need to know that it's not just about that. It really is about superior returns, because then you begin to think about broader markets, being more inclusive, or pyramid, or sections of the economic pyramid contributing. And if I can just throw in one number, actually the amount of money that women wield in terms of purchasing power across the globe is over $15 trillion. So I don't think that's charity. They're making purchasing decisions. And if they are not being considered in tastes and preferences, then companies are not going to reach their full potential.
I think the discussion is coming to an end, sadly. It's about 10 to 4, and I know we have one more speaker who's going to give some remarks. But I do want to finish the discussion on talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area. The World Bank estimates that foreign direct investment into Africa could increase by up to 159%. As a result of the agreement. There's lots of other statistics as well about 30 million people lifted out of extreme poverty, for example. Obviously, I mentioned at the start those hundreds of billions of more money coming into the region. So I want to start with you, Aisha. What excites you, or doesn't, about what the free trade area, what opportunities it poses, but also can you foresee any risks and barriers that it might also pose?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think it's more exciting than frightening, because it's going to be the world's largest free trade area. It's a market of 1.5 billion people. The opportunities are boundless. I mean, we heard statistics about all the opportunities that exist on the African continent as on its own, in terms of minerals, human resources, capital, access to capital now. But it's an opportunity that also allows us to coexist more regional integration or continental integration. What people don't realize is that with ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, which is sort of almost a precursor to this free trade agreement, that has existed, although not utilized to its full potential. But people now see the benefits of this intra-African trade. Moving people across Africa alone, the potential in that is huge. But then we have now goods and services, and of course we have the commonality of resources and issues, so we can learn best practices from each other as well. So I see more rewards.
Shall we go to you, James? What do you think?
I'm going to give you one more brief number. The world has used 800 million tons of copper in the last 2,000 years. To get anywhere near net zero 2050, the world is going to need to use 800 million tons of copper in the next 25 years. A huge amount of that copper has to come from Africa. Now, at the moment, to get a ton of copper ore from Zambia or the Congo to the port can take 10 times longer than getting it from that port to China or the US because of problems at the borders. Yeah. As soon as that disappears, the seamlessness of Africa will be incredible, and the profits will go up because obviously you're not spending so much time. The actual emissions go down because the trucks spend less time on the road, and so it will be incredible. The quicker that governments can continue to break down trade barriers, the more effective we can get trade moving. Again, just even intra-Africa, let alone being exported outside. The future really looks incredibly promising for Africa.
Great, and I'm guessing you agree. I saw you shaking your head.
Yeah, I agree. What I would say, though, is that, Nigerians going to South Africa can't get visas on time. So, movement of people, and I just took that one route. Movement of people needs to happen, but needs to happen with the right policies in place, governments coming together to make it possible for that movement so that goods can move. Like I said earlier, the ports are an issue. And, technology, we haven't spoken much about technology. Technology is doing a great thing in actually as a leading indicator as to where the African Free Trade Continental Agreement potential could go, because you're already seeing movement of electronic goods and services, but it's still hindered. So I think the opportunity and potential is significant, but we do need to see more collaboration to break down the walls of movements that can happen. And good infrastructure, good business environments uniform regulatory environments. There's a lot that still needs to happen, and I think we need to be intentional about making that happen.
And one final question to all of you. If we look ahead to 10 years' time, for example, because we know 10 years is a very long time in politics, especially. What do you think Africa will look like, or what should it look like, given the trajectory? Aisha, I'll start with you.
No pressure. Well, I know what I would like it to look like. I mean, as I tell people, this whole, what we call in Nigeria, this whole Japa syndrome, where there's this migration to the West, is actually one of the most upsetting things for me. So I would like to see a continent that Africans, wherever they might be, are very happy to be able to come back home and contribute their wealth of knowledge, because you see them everywhere, and they're building other societies in other countries. So I'd like to see that brain gain.
If I follow on from that, to see that, I want to see the brain gain, but to see that brain gain, we need to make it possible for everybody to have access to good and affordable essential services. Education is, it's just, there's no question. If we can't sort out our education, we're going to lose this youth dividend we keep talking about. Rule of law, so stable regulatory environment, we need to see more of that. And we need to see infrastructure. So because people have moved because they are looking for a better life, it affects all of us, but they're not going to be emotional about just moving back just because it's Africa. Africa has to, and African countries have to be attractive because they hold promise for them for opportunity and the ability to just have a good life and good livelihoods. Like, we talk about health, we talk about education. Most of us in this room leave African shores to look for education and health. And you get to the West, and then you're being educated by an African anyway, or being served in a hospital, looked after by an African doctor anyway. So we need to have that basic infrastructure and environment that makes people want to stay. After all, we just got in this morning. It's a lot colder and grim here than it was yesterday. And when I was leaving yesterday, I was thinking, shudder. So we want to stay home, but we need the environment. And if Africa's going to reach its full potential, we need the environment and we need the people in the environment.
Yeah, I think that deserves a round of applause.
I'll give you a very brief summary then, a forecast obviously based on stock markets. I think the front page of The Economist will have the Magnificent Seven, and Amazon will be crossed out, and it will say Nigeria. Apple will be crossed out, and it says Kenya. Microsoft is crossed out, and it says Ghana. I think the world will be flooding. I think the world will be flooding into Africa. You'll have a wonderful stock market, hopefully not a bubble, nice and sustainable. But I think the world is just waking up to how important, and as it was said earlier, Africa's going to have to solve the world's problems, and that will be rewarded with much stronger capital markets.
Well, thank you, panel. Can we just give a round of applause to the three panelists? I'm just going to see if I can get a nod to see if we're ready to head on to the next section. I am honoured to be introducing our final speaker, the Honourable Shirley Ayorkor Botchwey, which I hope, again, I've pronounced correctly. She served as Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration for the Government of Ghana since 2017. She's also held roles previously as Deputy Minister for Information and Minister for Trade and Industry. Her tenure as Foreign Minister has been characterised by several notable achievements. This includes overseeing an extensive transformation in both human resource development and conditions of service for foreign service officers, including establishing the Foreign Service Institute, while introducing digitisation and enhanced online services for consular services. Ghana's foreign policy successes under her leadership also include the high visibility and positive image Ghana enjoys under the presidency of His Excellency Nana Akufo-Addo. So please put your hands together for the Honourable Shirley Ayorkor Botchwey.
Thank you very much. I bring you greetings from the government and people of Ghana, and to say that I'm extremely happy and grateful to be invited to be part of this very enriching conversation. I acknowledge Mr. Peter Obi, as well as the panelists. The largest number of citizens in the Commonwealth, we all know that they do not earn enough to power the production and market expansion which is needed to create economic security, whether in the industrialized or developing regions of the Commonwealth. So a Commonwealth strategy for industrialization and economic diversification, and a market and a consumer-based expansion that takes into account the potential of the 2.5 billion people is a guarantee against the stagnation that is widespread across our countries. And let me thank the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council and commend them for the leadership in exploring ways to support businesses and Commonwealth governments to finance emerging markets, to engage in sustainable practices and strengthen collaboration between the public and private sectors. Such collaboration is critical for unlocking the prosperity across the Commonwealth. We all know that the Commonwealth is made up of the richer countries and the much poorer and vulnerable countries. And so there's a need to unlock prosperity across the whole of the Commonwealth. We need greater institutional collaboration between the business leaders in the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth Secretariat to ensure that policy facilitates that enabling environment for increased investments and trade expansion, which is consistent with the vision of a prosperous Commonwealth. And this should cover infrastructure development. It should cover promoting intra-Commonwealth trade. It should cover information sharing and best practices. Also capacity building and technical assistance, policy alignment and coordination. It should cover the issue of youth and women empowerment. It should cover supply chain optimization and technology and innovation. Africa is perhaps the greatest trade and investment opportunity, and we've heard the panelists. We heard Mr. Obi lay the foundation. And within the Commonwealth, really, Africa is the place that will unlock the potential of what we can do as a Commonwealth of people. However, Africa is marginalized in the multilateral trading system with very limited footprints on the global trade landscape. Today, if you compare the cost of capital in Africa and in other parts of the world, you will be amazed how much we are paying to borrow in risk, because we are seen as a continent that is high risk, and therefore cost of capital is extremely high, which in effect has a negative impact on investments and the cost of doing business. our share in world trade is manifestly below vast potential, which is 3% and is based on a narrow range of exports, mostly primary products, minerals, oil and gas. And I always give the example of the story of cocoa. Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire control about 60% of the world's cocoa. However, all this cocoa is carted out in its raw form. And cocoa in products is about an industry worth 120 or so billion United States dollars. And yet the two countries that account for 60% of the world's cocoa only receive 7 billion, thereabout. So you have 7 billion against 120 billion. And that's sad. Because what happens is that we have a very youthful consumer market of the end products. And so the products come back to Africa because we have a large consumer market. And we buy those same products at a very high cost. Now what we have is an opportunity through the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is the world's largest free trade area since the establishment of the WTO. It covers our 54 countries, and its aim is to create a single market for goods and services across the continent. It represents the most significant opportunity, and we've heard the panelists. I see only opportunity to use the African Continental Free Trade Area to harness our economic potential, including even through the Commonwealth. And if we get it right, I believe that the young people who leave the shores of Africa, they only leave because they leave for greener pastures. They want a better life. If we can provide them with that better life in Africa, an industrialized Africa, I don't think that many of them will risk their lives to go on those perilous journeys across the Sahara in those overcrowded boats trying to cross the Mediterranean into Europe and elsewhere, because they'll stay home and help Africa develop for their benefit. So the potential is there. And I believe that Africa holds a central position within the Commonwealth. And the AfCFTA amplifies the attractiveness of doing business across the continent. It is only us Africans who can make it work. And I believe that we are on track to make it work. Our 56 member states of Africa, if you look at the Commonwealth, 21 of those states are Commonwealth countries. So this unique network offers a platform for collaboration, for trade, for shared development goals amongst our diverse member states. The AfCFTA, combined with Africa's membership in the Commonwealth, presents a great number of opportunities across the various sectors. The AfCFTA aims to eliminate tariffs on 90% of goods traded within the continent, facilitating increased intra-African trade and significantly enhancing the potential for trade and investment within and beyond the continent. This expansion of market access presents a significant opportunity for businesses to reach new customers and markets across Africa. Commonwealth countries can leverage this free trade area through investments on the continent to strengthen economic relationships, to boost exports, and attract investments in diverse sectors such as agriculture, manufacturing, services, and technology. The AfCFTA would foster economic growth. It will create jobs, like I've said already, and attract foreign direct investment, which would lead to industrialization, infrastructure development. That's key to be able to move the goods and services across Africa. Infrastructure development is key. We need to improve our competitiveness and make Africa a viable and reliable trading partner for Commonwealth countries and the world. The opportunities for Commonwealth businesses include, like I've said, infrastructure projects across Africa, for transportation networks, rail, air, road, energy. The panelists have talked about it already. The digital connectivity is key. These are all needed to maximize the benefits of the AfCFTA and to foster economic growth. The potential for partnerships across the Commonwealth for value addition to Africa's raw materials is enormous. But we need to get out of that mindset of sending out our raw materials, which are bound, because we have 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 12% of the world's oil, 8% of the world's natural gas reserves, 65% of the world's arable land, and 10% of the planet's internal renewable freshwater source. This is a continent with a lot of promise, with a lot of potential. And of course, the panelists, Mr. Obi, they have already talked about the statistics of a youthful population. Some people see it as a challenge, but I believe that the earlier we start seeing it as a potential, the better, because we will start working towards unearthing that potential. A skilled workforce will promote entrepreneurship and productivity across various sectors, which will foster sustainable development and, of course, the bottom line for businesses. So, ladies and gentlemen, leveraging technology and digital innovation is crucial in the modern business landscape. Commonwealth countries can collaborate with Africa to enhance digital infrastructure, e-commerce capabilities, and cybersecurity measures, enabling Commonwealth and African businesses to streamline business processes and enhance trade efficiency and inclusivity within and to thrive in the digital economy fostered by the AfCFTA. Other areas for profitable collaboration include, of course, cultural exchanges and people-to-people connections. This is key. This is very important. We need to foster entrepreneurship through the Commonwealth network and a platform for leveraging shared values. This is very important. So, more statistics. The market of 1.3 billion people, which is projected to rise to 1.7 billion by 2030. That's only in 7 years. And out of this market, 600 million are projected to be middle class, with a combined GDP projected to be close to 7 trillion by the year 2035. This cannot be anything but a dynamo for international business. And yes, business see Africa as a risk, but then we know of businesses that are making a lot of profits in Africa. Investment in these parts will not yield you anything close to what investment in Africa will yield any business or investor. And I think that the narrative must change. Yes, we do have a lot to do ourselves as a continent in terms of governance, in terms of the rule of law, but this has not stopped the potential and, in reality, what business is able to achieve in what is sometimes seen as a risky environment. So harnessing the Africa opportunity means tapping into, for us, a unified AfCFTA market that transcends individual national borders by streamlining trade procedures, reducing trade tariffs, stimulating cross-border investment, and creating an ecosystem conducive for sustainable growth. The compelling opportunities must spur the revival of the idea of a free trade agreement among Commonwealth countries. It's possible, because recent developments, including the advanced negotiations between the UK and India, the conclusion of free trade agreements by Australia and New Zealand with the UK, the initiation of negotiations for a free trade agreement between Canada and the UK, the conclusion of free trade agreements between the UK and several Commonwealth member states have changed the dynamics, and they have given us a unique opportunity to consolidate those agreements towards a Commonwealth-wide free trade agreement. So I am definitely for a Commonwealth-wide free trade agreement where Commonwealth countries can have access to each other's country. And I always use the example of a bank from Trinidad and Tobago, Republic Bank, that is established in some African countries and is doing extremely well. So I can just see the potential and how countries can invest in other Commonwealth member states and do some very good business. You have Nigerian banks in Ghana and elsewhere within the Commonwealth, but we need to establish that free trade area for the Commonwealth. And we also need the Commonwealth to work with what we have in Africa, because the potential is there, the opportunities are there, and the African Continental Free Trade Area also gives us a ready opportunity just waiting to be tapped into. So we invite all of you to Africa, and I must say that 10 years from now, I see very brisk trading amongst African countries, trading African goods that are produced in Africa and not produced elsewhere. And I know that it is possible, where most of our countries have put in all the building blocks to ensure that investments are safe, that investments are thriving, that we are beginning to industrialize. And I believe that it is possible, and we will make it. And the African young person will not want to leave the shores of Africa in search of greener pastures, because they'll find greener pastures in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all our panelists today and our two speakers as well. And hope you have
Thank you, Mercy Muroki, for that. That's it for day one. We're all done here. Those of you who are attending the Global Advisory Council meeting that's in here, otherwise enjoy your afternoon and evening. See you here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m.